it's on the to me it's on that side. If you're eating fruit and you're doing fine, no problem. If you're not doing fine, then that's one of the things you might look at, trying to cut down or cut out.
In your opinion, what are the top like four foods that people should be eating to maintain their weight, to have a healthy body, to stay lean, even as you get older, right? Because like I said, your body changes, hormones change, and it's all about, of course, keeping as much lean muscle mass as possible, right? So you can burn more.
Yeah.
What would you say? Are you going to say the same, like salmon, bear? Like, what would you, besides like the ones that
Yeah,
everyone knows?
I mean, those are all great choices, and I think that of the foods, I don't think that there's as much disagreement as most people think. So if you look at it and people say, avocados and salmon and olive oil and stuff, that used to be controversial, not particularly controversial anymore. People are pretty good on that. I think that one of the, so in addition to the foods that we're eating, um, I think what doesn't get enough attention is how often we're eating it. And that's sort of what I talked about a lot in the obesity code, is that you're only getting half of the story here. Because if you eat, what you think is a healthy food, and, I think it's, as long as you're staying unprocessed, as long as you're keeping the sugars low, you're fine. But if you're eating all the time, you can still gain a lot of weight. And that's one of the things that has changed a lot. So if you look at the foods that we eat, yes, it's changed. But the other thing that's changed significantly since the 70s is how often we eat. And that probably doesn't get any attention. At least when I wrote the book, got sort of zero attention. So people were eating 6, 8, 10 times a day because they were told to. Like, you'd see it in the
keep your metabolism high.
Yeah, that whole thing was actually based on no science at all. There was no studies that said.
What was it based on? Because
I'll tell
people
you where
still
it came from.
Okay.
It was a total. It was totally made up. Let's just put it that way. So what happened in the 70s is that we went to this low fat diet, right? So this was the 70s. The dietary guideline says all fat is bad for you, and therefore you should cut it out. And then asked the processed food makers to please come up with foods that are low in fat, because this was the idea, was to lower heart attacks. So the heart attack rate had gone up significantly in the 50s and 60s, and nobody knew why at the time. You look back and it's like, it was obvious. Everybody was smoking. They went to war, everybody came back, they smoked, and there was smoking everywhere. If you look at old shows, everybody's just smoking all over the place. They had those ashtrays in the airplanes seats, right? It was ridiculous how much people were smoking. But everybody was smoking. That's probably why you had a lot of heart attacks. But nobody knew it at the time. Of course, tobacco companies said, couldn't be the smoking. That can't be true. So people said it was dietary fat, and that didn't make any sense, because if you look at the proportion of dietary fat, it had been stable for the last 50 years. So how do you get this sort of 5-fold increase in heart attacks when you're eating the exact same amount of fat? But anyway, that's what they said. It was very controversial, but then the government says, yes, eat low fat. So everybody ate low fat. The problem was that they weren't eating more broccoli, they were eating more bread, because everybody switched over from eating meat to low fat, and low fat processed, not low fat, sort of whole food sort of thing. So there's a lot of white bread, a lot of pastas, sugar Snackwells, the sort of poster child. And sugar got a free pass because, everybody prior to that thought sugar was bad for you. But when fat became dietary villain number one, then sugar got a free pass. So sugar consumption went through the roof. Refined carbohydrates went through the roof. And so what happened was that people were eating, instead of steak and bacon in the morning, which would keep you full until lunch, they were eating 2 slices of, toast with jam, right?
Right.
Super low fat, but super processed, all simple carbs. They spike their insulin way up, they spike their
Right.
glucose way up. Then it would crash because it was very processed. And by 10:30, people are just ravenous. So then they're like, oh, I need to go get myself a low fat muffin. So then they got themselves a low fat muffin, like a blueberry muffin, which was all white flour and sugar again. So basically, it's a cake. So then again, same thing. They spike their glucose, spike their insulin. Then it crashed. At lunchtime, they're ravenous again. By 2:30, they're super hungry again. So in the 70s, when people were eating the steak and eggs in the morning sort of thing, they could eat 3 meals a day and not be hungry. When you're eating sort of highly refined carbs all day long, you can't do that. And see, people said, look, I have to snack all the time because I'm just really hungry. But it must be a good dietary pattern because I'm so low fat, right? So they took
Right.
that sort of premise, which is low fat, which was all wrong, by the way, which we didn't find out until 20 years afterwards. So then people are like eating 6 times a day, but then they thought it was good. So then they're like, oh, you have to eat snacks all the time. So it gets entrenched into this whole thing. You look at schools, they're all about snacks and after school snacks and after dinner snacks. And if you have like soccer, you have snacks in between because like, yeah, you need to give these kids, cookies and juice in between soccer. So anyway, that's how that whole eat all the time came about. But it was never something that was deliberate. It was never something that was studied. It was just made up and we sort of just went with it. And then, of course, by the 2000s, people started to notice that, hey, people who eat nuts, for example, super high in fat, were very healthy. People who ate, Mediterranean and olive oil and avocados were very healthy. So then there's that whole healthy fat thing, which you had to specify because, of course, all fat was bad for you.
Right.
But then they had this healthy fat. But then it turns out that a lot of the natural saturated fats, like in butter, were also not that bad for you. So, then, even the saturated fats sort of everybody's starting to walk it back and starting to say, well, I'm not sure if that was ever true. But it took 25, 30 years to get to that point.
Right. But even like, in the fitness space, bodybuilders or people who are like super hardcore in the gym, people who are hardcore in the gym, they're not eating the processed stuff, but they're still having their 5-6 meals a day, these small portions, because the idea is the whole idea of keeping your metabolism always burning, right? So then it's sort of, they'll have like a little bit of a sweet potato and a little bit of a chicken breast and a piece of broccoli. And they're doing it in like small, 300 calorie meals, right? But still 6 times a day. Yeah. So why is that? How is that? Is it basic? Is that kind of calorie restriction? It's just spacing it over time.
Yeah, I don't think it really makes any difference. That whole, I think they could eat 3 meals a day. And,
right.
You look at, one, a lot of them just burn a lot of calories anyway. So sometimes it's hard to get all of those calories. You see that with elite athletes a lot. They just are just burning so much calories through their training and so on that sometimes you have to eat a few extra. And for them, if it's working well for you, no problem. Go ahead and do it, right? And the problem is that what is working for them, and I see a lot of these people. They're in the gym like 3-4 hours a day. Like that's just not the same as
a regular person.
Somebody who's in the gym sort of 3-4 times a week.
Right.
It's a totally different situation.
It's a